you for joining us with the next session of Lunch with AB. Obviously, the topic here is working with DOTs and MOTs. And again, my name is Chad Julius with Allen Block. What I want to do today is thank you guys here. We're going to give you guys control over your own mic. So if you want to chime in and ask any questions, otherwwise I will be monitoring the question field too. So just get my attention any way you need to and provide a little comment. So our goals today, some of the objectives that we have is obviously I want to just kind of do a quick definition of who the DOTs and MOTs are. I want to take a little time and go through the approval process or what we've seen over the time, talk about what are some of the requirements, and then some of the follow-up activities that you might get asked to do. And I do want to say that really every state, agency, country, wherever you're at, is going to change. It's going to vary depending on the requirements are. So what's good in California might be different than obviously in New Zealand. And so there's going to be changes throughout. And what I want to do is just kind of share some of the common experiences we've had out there and kind of some lessons learned. That was the goal of this Lunch with AB. And, I want to really kind of highlight why do we seek that approval. And this video is kind of playing here a little bit. And the whole goal of getting approval is so I always say, get the ticket to ride the ride. There's a lot of times where this project right here, was completed in 2012. It's Vancouver, Washington, and about 70,000 square feet or 6,500 square meters of all that AB vertical. And when we're usually talking DOTs or MOT type work, we're usually talking obviously the transportation side where near vertical is used more often than not, but a very good project. But what we notice with these type of projects, the scope of work can be relatively large. You get the bigger projects, you get a lot more demand there. So I do have to share the story that our production partner that was involved with this, this was one of the first projects he worked on the DOT level. And he's often said that, man, he's lost about 5 years of his life because of the demand of this project, whether it's the information, the communication, being on site, anything like that. There's just so much involved with it. And so it's not for everybody. It is one of those that will, when you look for approval, we want to be kind of going with your eyes wide open, but we do know there's a lot of potential. And as you can see, they just kind of did a little bit of a roundabout and now they're back coming the other direction. So who are the DOTs and MOTs? Really, they're government agencies. They're Department of Transportation. We see that name used in the U.S., Australia, parts of Canada, popping up throughout the world. But Ministry of Transportation is really what we see more often in other countries. I go down to New Zealand and some of these other ones. They usually have either like a Ministry of Transportation or Ministry of Transport, or they've got variations of those names. But really, the DOT and MOT are government agencies. And, I grabbed this from the U.S. Department of Transportation information, and they were established in 1966 by Congress. And their mission is going to be very similar to all of the MOT and DOTs out there. Really, their goal is to make sure they've got the most efficient and modern transportation system to help improve the quality of life for the people, communities. They try to promote expansion and development. And so there's a lot of reasons why these agencies exist, and it's tried to improve that roadway. Now, a little sidestep here, at least in the States, we do have another agency that a lot of people refer to, the Federal Highway Administration. It is actually within the Department of Transportation, but they're given the responsibilities to enhance the movement of people. They're looking for ways to safety and traveling in public and that kind of stuff. Really, what we've seen, the FHWA, they get to kind of think outside the blocks. They get to kind of look for new technologies, whether it's construction method or products or evaluations. So they're looking for innovative technologies. And really, we were fortunate last year, one of our own, Don Clayton, was able to go to one of their innovative days. And it was in Virginia. And he had an hour-long segment where he presented to the FHWA applications like the AB fence, or using Allen Block with GRS, IBS applications, because FHWA, they went ahead and they spearheaded this whole initiative. And it's GRS, IBS, where they're using soil reinforced structures to suspend and hold up the bridge abutments or the bridge structures. But what was interesting, what was new to us, is even though the FHWA came up with this concept, when Don was giving the presentation to that group, very few of them understood what this was. And so he did the whole educational component, and really what we were pushing is using alum block as a facing instead of what they typically have spec'd out was kind of the gray block or masonry units. And so we've got the benefits of setback and shear keys and durability testing, and they've got all the benefits of an alum block in an industry ready to go. So that was our message to them. But that educational component needs to happen. And you're going to hear me talk a little bit about that throughout the entire presentation. So here, what do we need? What do we know about the DOTs and MOTs? Obviously, when you're talking about the projects, it is going to be transportation related. That's what they do. And so when they look at new roadways, new construction, or even when they're improving existing roadways, like they're expanding a lane or adding a lane, they're looking at what that impact is to the environment. And so they might need a retaining wall to hold up the grade to give them that leveling land or level the land. They might need to do a noise assessment for the fencing product. There's a lot of things that they get involved with when that transportation project is being developed. A lot of things happen on the front end, and that's where we can really bring some value to them. As far as how they're funded, we know that it can range. We know that there are usually joint agencies involved because we see the DOTs and MOTs getting involved with cities and counties or rural municipalities where they are taking that and just like I always say, follow the money. If their funds are being allocated, then they've got some jurisdiction in it. So obviously they're being funded by taxpayers. They're the ones that are paying the fee and then to the government, and then they allocate those resources. So I often in our conversations with the DOTs and MOTs, I really leverage the fact that we've got an economical solution. We've got a way to bring value to them that can save the taxpayers money, and that should resonate with them. That's the whole goal. So here's just a couple of pictures of different projects that are related to the DOTs and MOTs. This happens to be a project down in Australia, making room for that roadway expansion. So they're holding up the grade. You can see that concrete swale that's above the wall, and that's what you're going to notice in a lot of the Department of Transportation work is that they are very engineered. They've got systems in place, kind of almost redundancies. Here's that same project that was in that state of Washington. So you can see the barriers on top, but even the barriers below as crash deterrents. And so they're not damaging the wall. And so getting that engineering done up front, trying to lay out those plan sets to make sure you minimize the change orders. But even the projects can range in a little smaller scope. This happens to be a project in Arkansas where they're just doing a drainage swale along the roadway. But again, you've got that impact barrier behind the wall and things to consider when you got public health involved. If you're familiar with alum block, you've definitely seen this picture in a lot of our literature, but this is a roadway. You've got another wall that looks just like this on the back side. And we are starting to see aesthetics drive some of these business decisions or project decisions. They're looking for something to give them a little bit more aesthetic appeal. And again, now all of a sudden that just goes right into our wheelhouse as far as what a segmental retaining wall and what alum block can do. We can bring in the textures, we can bring in the colors. We've seen Aztec being used in a Florida DOT project. And so there's a lot of things when you're looking for non-split options, we can bring value to the DOT and MOT. This project was in New York, a little on-ramp for a roadway. What I loved about this project and what's interesting is it is really next door to our production facility out there. So these guys, when they wanted block, they were really able to kind of just knock on the door of our producer, and the guys were able to use a forklift and deliver the pallets right to the job site without loading a truck and stuff like that. So kind of unique, but you can see here the barrier that was built on top, and that's a traffic barrier. So you got the moment slab and everything else in there associated with this. Now into the fence, this project is in Alberta, Canada, and we talk about sound and quality of life, and that noise that needs to be abated when they do a road expansion. But not everybody wants that solid fence. So here, this happens to be that church, and they wanted to make sure their church was still visible from the roadway. So now all of a sudden we're working with the engineers and the Ministry of Transportation up there trying to figure out how to get see-through panels. And so just kind of creating that solution. And this one here, obviously, when you're talking about joint agencies, this was developed for the Mount Pleasant down in South Carolina, which is a city. They were really driving this project, but it happened to be along US 17, which is kind of the DOT jurisdiction. So the South Carolina DOT is involved. They're looking at schematics. They're looking at reviewing the design calculations. So yeah, like I said, there's going to be multiple layers when you're talking about these type of applications. And that's really kind of the takeaway on this is we know that the scope of work is potentially relatively large. I mean, you look at this picture and it's like that fence goes way off into the distance. And, this was almost 3,000 linear feet for the first phase, and the average height was about 12 to 15 feet high. So we know these projects can have some substantial square footage or square meters on there, but we also know that we gotta handle that properly. So let's talk about obtaining approval. And I got to admit, we don't have blanket approval for every state, every municipality, every Ministry of Transportation or country that we sell Allen Block in. In fact, a lot of the projects we work on at the DOT level might be a project by project approval, but we only seek the approval if our local partner is ready for it. We've got some production partners that just are, for one reason or another, logistically aren't set up to handle those type of projects, whether it's the durability or compressive strength or freeze thaw requirements, or maybe it's manpower. We'll get into what the requirements are to service this type of market. So really, we rely on you guys to determine if you're ready, and then when that is ready to roll, we try to get that ticket to ride the ride. And first thing we do is find out what the current requirements are. So do they have a qualified products list, which is kind of referred to as that QPL, or approved products list, which is APL. We check to see what is already approved. Is there an approval process? Is there conditional approval requirements? And what that means is, for example, we've got in the state of Tennessee here in the States, we've got a conditional approval. And am I concerned about that? No, that just means we just don't have the experience with the Tennessee DOT that they're comfortable giving us a global approval for them. And so they limit the size of a project we can work on, or maybe the height of that project. Don't get me wrong, it's still pretty tall and it's still pretty sizable. So it's not really a huge limitation, but we still have that ticket. We're still listed on the QPL as an approved product, and I'm okay with that. My whole goal, or our whole goal, when we get that approval, is just to make sure they recognize Allen Block is a potential value for them. And so, like I said, we start with what is that defined procedure. And some states are very well defined. I look at, whether it's a New York DOT or Ministry or Minnesota DOT, even up in Canada, the Ministry of Transportation, there might be a very definitive procedure to get that approval. They might have the requirements for the block really spelled out. Maybe they call out how many cycles for freeze thaw. Maybe they call out what that durability is, and they even have a form that you need to fill out. In other words, some states, for example, we're going through the process right now for the state of Ohio, again here in the States, where we've used Allen Block on DOT projects, but they don't really have an approval process. So we're right now working with them and developing what the requirements should be, which is great. Now we're on the ground floor. We're helping them. We're building that relationship. And so it's important to understand what the defined procedures are. There are third-party reviewers out there. Again, coming into what I've been experienced here, there's the HITECH, which is the Highway Innovation Technology Evaluation Center. That is part of the FHWA. There's even kind of a newer idea, which is Ideas Deserving Exploratory Analysis, kind of an idea program. It's a third-party review, and what that's supposed to do is, obviously, you pay this third-party agency to review all your products. They write up a report, and there's some substantial cost to this, but then it's supposed to make it easier to get additional approvals when you go state by state or province by province. So we have seen and been more successful working one-on-one. That's our preference. We know that it builds relationships, and you guys are in the sales business. We know that relationships are key when you are looking for those future opportunities. So what we do is when we're obtaining that approval, once we identify maybe what that approval process might entail, we look at who might be doing that review. Is it a new products committee? Is it is it a committee or is it one person? For example, when we went through the state of Washington approval, it really was kind of one person, and that was tough because I kind of felt like this individual only worked part time. It was kind of pulling teeth to try to get some response, and it took a long time to get through that new products evaluation. Even though this person was just kind of the liaison, they still funneled the information to the geotechnical engineers or the bridge engineers. So they're going to have a heavy hand in that review because they're the technical experts. But once you identify who is going to kind of work through that review and review the documents, we want to schedule a meeting. I can't emphasize this enough. It's so important to do that face-to-face meeting, get to know each other, kind of tear down some of those perceived barriers. Again, plant some seeds about educational opportunities. But it is one of the first things that we do. And if you need somebody from Allen Block to help you with that meeting and participate with you, we're happy to do that. But it's so important to do those meetings and then kind of communicate what the expectations are. The beautiful thing is we've got a great story to tell. We've got all the testing that they require. We have all the experience that they require. So it is easy for us to put a packet together and package together to get those approvals. We just need to know what the rules of the game are, and that's where that meeting really comes into focus. All right. Now, working on projects. Once you get that approval, or even if it's a project by project basis, there are going to be requirements, and some of them might be even slightly different than was outlined in the approval process. So again, you got to look at what the durability requirements are, what the compressive strength, what are the deliverables need to be. And I got to bring in this little caution here for you guys. You're going to see that the consultants that the DOTs are working with and the MOTs are working with, they're going to have very little, some of them have very little knowledge on Allen Block and segmental retaining walls. And so you're going to find that they're victims of just simply cutting and pasting specifications out there. And we've seen it to date where they'll have dry cast retaining walls kind of referenced in the spec, but then all of a sudden they're bringing in some wet cast requirements. All of a sudden they're saying, yeah, Allen Block is the product, but we need air entrainment or a certain percentage of air entrainment. And you're like, wait a minute, that's two different manufacturing processes. So even though they're creating the specs, they don't understand everything that is in our industry. So again, an educational opportunity for you. When you're looking at who's preparing and we're they're basically acting as the engineers or owner's representative. The engineer is basically putting the documents, the working documents, on the DOT's behalf, and maybe the DOT is just reviewing it and signing off on it. But watch out for that copy and paste. We see that on the DOT applications and MOT applications, but even the GRS IBS as well. Other things that have popped up. This is a picture of a pallet label for the Indiana DOT here in the States. And what they do is they require plant inspections. And so they'll come to the plant and they'll actually allocate a certain part of the inventory. And they'll say, okay, these pallets right here have been approved. Here is the DOT reference number on that pallet. And then when those pallets get delivered to the job site, somebody has to collect those numbers and document that meets the requirements that were outlined. And, the individual that sent me this, our production partner in Indiana, they were talking about, if they forget to pull those numbers and collect this information, it gets to be very problematic because you're documenting everything all the step of the way. And so those product approvals or those plant inspections can really come in. I know Massachusetts DOT, they don't really have an approval process for the product. They're more concerned about the plant inspection. So being aware of what the requirements are important. Other things to think about when you're working on a project is contractors. Not every contractor is set up to be successful in that DOT and MOT market. There are going to be some qualifications that they're going to have to be able to have, and they're going to have the equipment and the manpower to do some of these larger projects. But what is kind of nice, we are starting to see the certification kind of diving in here, and here's a picture of one of our guys handing out a certification to a guy. But we're starting to see people or the DOTs and the consultants out there requiring the certified wall builders are being part of that submittal. And so they might not call out Allen Black certification, but they're going to say must be manufactured certified, or at least have like the experience I talk about here, maybe a certain number of a square footage or a square meters of approved product installed with some past experience, and maybe have a list of projects they've worked on. That's going to have to be part of their submittal. Obviously, they're going to have some financial requirements in there. They're going to have to show their insurance. They're going to have to show the bonding that they have. That's going to have to be part of their submittal. And just not every contractor is set up for that. Some DOTs and MOTs actually have lists of qualified contractors and qualified consultants. And if they're not on that list, that's a problem. And so you got to look at what those requirements are too. Obviously, I just mentioned sometimes you'll have lists of qualified consultants. And so my experience, and one of the biggest light bulb moments I've had working with engineers or the projects, is making sure you have the right engineer. It's really going to greatly simplify your life. And so look at who's doing the work out there already. Get in front of those guys. Make sure they know who you are. Make sure they know the value that you can bring to them, their tools and resources, and educate them. If you can do that, you're off to the races, because they need to know what the requirements are. That MOT and DOT is kind of a demanding customer, and so they need to know what it takes to kind of, I would say, play in their sandbox. If they know what the requirements are, they've got the people and the manpower in place, that helps. And so they understand the design requirements. Like here in the States, and we use the AASHTO code, which is obviously a little bit more conservative than what the Allen Block and the NCMA methodologies look like. And the requirements of the submittal, whether that is the barrier, the water management, like that swale, there's so many things that come into play that as long as you've got that qualified engineer, that's really going to make a difference. And so, huge opportunity there working with these designers and getting them trained. There are also going to be some opportunities or requirements of you. Without a doubt, it's more than just delivering the product. They're going to be looking for you as a technical expert as well. And so very often you might have to attend the pre-construction meetings so you can answer questions. You might have to be available by a phone or in-person meetings along the way. Maybe even have to be on the site during the wall construction. And that happens. You look at Oregon DOT. We were working on projects there. We got the approval. And, very often we look at the manufacturer's rep as being you guys. You guys are the ones out there in the field. You guys are the ones selling the product. You guys have the best idea of how to install it and can do the teaching side of it. But, Oregon defined the manufacturer's field representative, right? The first bullet point is they must be a licensed PE. Well, not very often do our production partners have engineers or professional engineers on staff. And so now all of a sudden we got to look at working with that engineer or getting another engineer, the wall engineer, involved so they can do the oversight. Because the other thing is then they have to be trained by the manufacturer, aka you guys, to understand the nuances of the product. And then not only that, on site, there's got to be almost direct supervision. This manufacturer's field representative would have to be on site for the first 10% of that wall length up to a height of like 10 feet of backfilled and compact. So basically what they're calling out for is somebody's got to be on site the entire time. Now, is that you, or is that consultant, that inspector? So there's some significant timing involved there with you guys. And so making sure you're aware of that. And really what we try to do is that on-site inspection should really be done by that engineer or that engineering entity. And really that kind of falls into the requirements when the follow-up. When you look at just because the project's done doesn't mean the work is done. a lot of times the DOTs and MOTs are going to be looking for compliance letters. They're going to want to know that these walls were built properly and that they were properly compacted. The safety measures for the railings and the barriers above were properly done. And all of that needs to be documented along the way, so that way these letters can be provided. And that's where these on-site inspections are so invaluable. And we want to make sure it's there. And again, pushing that responsibility to that inspector and engineer is the best way to do that. And in fact, that's our recommendation, which means getting back to the right engineer on your team to begin with makes your life a lot easier. So that's kind of getting the approval, working on the projects. Some final thoughts. And this is why we see more and more of our production partners looking to get involved with the DOT or looking to get that approval. It's not so much the fact that they want to work on the MOT and DOT projects. If you look at the market segment of that work, that transportation work, it is relatively small compared to your residential and your commercial work. And so one would argue and really wonder why you want to create those headaches and work for a demanding customer or client like the MOT or DOT. Well, yes, there are opportunities for selling block, but really it is that trickle-down effect that we're seeing. You know, you look at what the counties, cities, site civils are doing. They're looking at who's on those QPL lists and APL lists. They're looking to see what the requirements are, and they're starting to bring those into their projects. So now all of a sudden you're looking at those MOT and DOT requirements even for some commercial work. And so that is important. So that's why I keep kind of referring it to that ticket to ride the ride. If you're on that qualified products list, that's a good thing. All of a sudden that opens up that additional work opportunities on the commercial work or other public work that is not directly tied to the DOT and MOT work. And that can work against us too, unfortunately. You know, for example, you know, in Minnesota's DOT, this is kind of like the hotbed of segmental retaining walls here in Minnesota. When we started in the late 80s and early 90s, we started doing work, and I say we as an industry started doing work for Minnesota DOT right away. Well, the blocks that are being manufactured today are completely different than what were being manufactured 20, 25 years ago. So you can imagine the deterioration and the quality of product that we had as soon as salts were being introduced and all that stuff. So unfortunately, Minnesota has one of the highest requirements for freeze-thaw durability. And so it makes it difficult for segmental retaining walls to be used. And we're starting to see that in like states like Colorado. All of a sudden, they're looking at higher requirements for it. And the reason why is because they had some problems 10, 15 years back, and they're starting to get around to doing something about it. So that is where we're starting to work with these guys on the front end, saying, listen, let's kind of draw the line here a little bit, and let's show you what we're doing today for the future work. And that way we're not limiting the growth opportunities we have on the commercial work because of that trickle-down effect. So keep that in mind. That's why we're seeing some of you guys working so diligently with the DOT. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of you guys are being very successful with that government agency and looking for opportunities there. The last final thought I have is we got to get in front of them. We got to train them every step of the way. We got to treat these guys like design engineers so they understand the value Allen block and segmental retaining walls can do. Most of them, their background is going to be like reinforced concrete. They're going to lean on the MSC panels, so the concrete panels with the metal tiebacks. That's what they know. And so we need to teach them why segmental retaining walls is an innovation for them and how we can provide a site solution. So you need to get in front of them. You need to train them with the design presentation, the best practices. That best practices for SRW design is made for them. They're not probably doing the design for that, but they're overseeing a lot of things. So best practices is great. And obviously you can't ignore the fence opportunities as well. And the beautiful thing is those training classes offer continuing education credits. And so it makes it a little easier to open the door. And one thing to keep in mind, a lot of times you don't have to buy them lunch. In fact, because they're a government agency, they usually have policies and procedures against like taking bribes. And they say like buying a lunch could be looked at as a bribe. So you can schedule these outside of your traditional lunch and learn presentations and really kind of keep your schedule open. So definitely need to get in front of them and train them as we move through this. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So kind of a review. We went through what the DOT and the DOTs and MOTs are, and kind of defined who they do and what kind of projects they work on. We talked about obtaining approval and what that means. We talked about some of the project requirements for the block, the contractor, the engineer, and yourself, and then even some of those follow-up requirements as well. And we need to make sure we're in front of them. So if you got any questions, please feel free to go ahead and fire them away. I do have a little comment in here from Sharon. I appreciate the thank you for the information there. But if you've got anything else, let me know. Obviously, we're continuing to do our trainings online. Our next scheduled online session is getting to know or getting engineers on your side. So join us next month. It's a great conversation about what tools and resources you have, because we know engineers are so powerful in the commercial market. And then obviously we've got a whole ramped up accelerated schedule here in the month of April because of what's going on here with COVID-19. So I encourage you guys to participate in those as well, and emails have gone out. But again, with that, I'm just going to kind of pause and tell you guys to be safe out there, and we look forward to working with you. If you want to pursue the DOT and MOT market, let us know. Like I said, we've got a great story to tell. We've got all the testing in place, and we'd love to kind of bring value to that. So with that, I'm going to just kind of pause and see if there's any other questions that might come in. But if not, I'll wish you guys a good day, and look forward to the next time we get to get together. All right, no questions coming in. So with that, I'll sign off, and we'll talk to you guys soon.